Today, we got a dynamic duo from Foundation Capital, Ashu Garg and Jaya Gupta. Ashu solved a Rubik's Cube in 25 seconds when he was 11. That's massive, especially it took me like 5 minutes. And that same obsession with cracking complex problems led him to back Databricks before it hit the $43 billion valuation that it just did. He's been writing checks for a long time. I actually met him when he was a trainee and I was racing for Outreach, and with 6 unicorns in his portfolio. Now let's talk about Jaya. She is just 27 and was named one of the VC Journal's 2025 Rising Stars after transitioning from chief of staff to partner in record time. I don't know what the previous record was, but it was a record time. So now let's dig into why SaaS is dead, which is super spicy. I can't believe they wrote a whole paper on it, in which legendary AI companies are actually just fancy wrappers on GPTs. And what happens when human work becomes obsolete? Not just software, but humans too. Ashu, Jaya, great to have you both here. Let's get paid. Ashu and Jaya, it's so good to have you. This has been a long time coming for me. I've been reading all your content. You guys are very prolific, so I'm so excited to have you on the pod.
Thank you so much for having both of us.
Thanks so much.
No, you both are incredible. So let's start at the very beginning. Like, what was the original thesis that drove you to create all this content around agents, all this shit talking around SaaS? So walk me through what was the aha moment that initiated this snowball effect of your investment thesis and the content you're putting out.
As you know, AI has been around for as long as there's been software at some level. And, as a firm, we've been investing in AI, some version of AI for 15 years. Uh, the macro thesis of AI has not changed. It's, you're automating some sort of human task. AI is a prediction machine that automates human tasks. What's changed in the last 2 or 3 years is what you can accomplish and the degree to which you can automate tasks has completely changed. And so, you know, when GPT-3 got launched, that to me
Yeah.
was sort of the real turning point, much before ChatGPT, because it was clear that of anything that was textual in nature, which is 75% of all white collar work, would ultimately get automated away. So for me, that was the turning point. And then, beyond that, all VCs are salespeople with fancy business cards. So, as an AE, I need my marketing content.
100%. That's your calling card. All right, but you guys started calling SaaS dead not too long ago. So what was the turning point that you said, "Oh shit, like SaaS is dead now"? Because that is fighting words. Like, Anshu, you were just invested in SaaS not
Yeah.
even 5 years ago, 3 years ago, and Jaya, the same with you. So you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So when do you start calling it like that, and what gave you the strength to go make that assertion?
I think it's really when we started seeing agents come to fruition. And I think this was like, back when ChatGPT came out, maybe 6 months later, you started seeing these agents which could like really read and interpret like structured and unstructured content, generate output, set priorities, and direct tasks. And it's very similar to like how a skilled human actually performs a service. And I think because we're moving from software being something that organizes a workflow to something that sort of almost replaces a human or alters how a job is fundamentally executed, we're basically that was like the first time where we're like, okay, if AI will actually do the work that was once done or handled by whole categories of highly skilled people.
For me, it was a moment in time. I had this
Yeah.
conversation over a glass of wine with my wife, who told me, "Hey, when I moved from Excel to CRM, it was kind of better, but not really.
Right.
But if I can get AI to automate the things that my team does on top of my CRM, that I will pay for."
Mm.
And this is a non-tech business. She runs a hedge fund. So when a hedge fund manager is asking to pay for AI, willing to pay a price point that was many times what the CRM would cost.
Right.
I think that was the aha moment for me.
Got it.
And obviously, I'm using an example. I think that was true across a lot of conversations I was having.
So all this noise around agents killing SaaS. Like, what's a path in which that happens? Is it a slow boil of the frog type, or you see contraction and churn, and then you see AI taking off, or are you going to see whole categories of SaaS coming offline and some others will survive? Like, what's the makeup of the landscape in 5 years from now?
Look, I think like most changes, they happen slowly and then very suddenly and very dramatically. So I think the phase we're in today is mid-sized SaaS companies, and I'll say anything between 100 million and a billion that's not AI native. Mid-sized SaaS companies are struggling. Right?
Yeah.
9 out of 10 are seeing some churn, but the churn isn't dramatic yet. They're seeing employee attrition. They're fighting a war of feature by feature. They're trying to add AI, pixie dust here and there, but net, they're all struggling. But they
Mm.
don't have the capital to actually go make acquisitions. And so these guys will come bumping along, and our little startup from you pick category. I mean, you founded Outreach, incredible company for a decade. Look at the numbers today. It's flat and maybe marginally declining. And then you see companies, there's a whole range of companies. We talked about Jaya's brother, his company. You talk about Reggie, a bunch of other companies in the category. They're coming bottom up from tiny bases and growing like crazy, but they don't have credibility today. And I think what's going to change is in a couple of years, the laggards would look at it and say, why do I want to be with, whatever that incumbent platform is? Sales Loft,
Yeah.
Outreach in this category, but whatever else. And then the bit will flip.
So there will be a tipping point in your mind
There
of
will be a tipping point. I think there will be a tipping point. Now, companies that have more than $1 billion in revenues are generating enough cash that they will probably go buy their way out of this.
Mm.
So that's why the middle gets squeezed, in my opinion. And
Got it.
squeezed to the point it disappears.
Jaya, in your point of view, you have said that people are buying outcomes; they're not buying seats anymore. But there's a lot of pushback. If you see that on LinkedIn, a lot of people are saying, "Well, outcomes are hard, outcomes are difficult, outcomes are bespoke, outcomes are blah 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 blah." So how's it gonna play out? Is it hard or is it gonna happen?
That's a great question. I think that it will eventually happen for certain functions or certain roles where you actually can measure the outcome. But I think what it'll actually naturally look like over time is that, and what we're seeing from our portfolio companies is more of an evolution versus like jumping right to the outcome. And so I think, the past decade was more seat access based pricing, and that still exists today with a lot of our AI companies as well. But I think what you're seeing more commonly is more usage-based pricing, charging on tokens, minutes, queries. So the bill scales with the level of activity, or workflow-based pricing, where you're charging per job done, whether it's documents processed, reports written, or maybe your amount of support tickets that are triaged or something of the sort.
Yeah.
Um, I think outcome-based pricing is still it's still a nice catchy phrase that you see on LinkedIn, and I think people would love for it to come true, but it's very, very hard to measure, like, what's a desired result. And I think the customer might think a desired result is different. And then I think that the vendor also might think that result is different. And I think the other point here is that, outcome is actually just a function of the customer's product as well, not just your software. And so, going back to some of the AI SDR type companies that we mentioned, I know that they don't want to be called AI SDR companies, but like some of the other ones that have not done so well, that 11x, for example, it kind of tells us that it's also a function of the customer's product as well. So yeah.
Interesting. So you have in your mind, the AI SDR companies they're doing everything right. They're just selling a shit product, and hence that's what's hard.
Some of them, the ones that are not using reasoning, forward deployed engineers, and saying, hey, it's a free for all.
Interesting. So will that category persist and exist, or is that just a fad and it will burn out? Like, what's your take?
So I think the category will definitely exist. I think, unfortunately, the word AI SDR has, because of the things that have happened in the space with 11x and other companies, um, I think AI SDR, that phrase, has gotten a really bad rap. And so
Mm.
every other company in this space has now had to has had to figure out marketing. of how do I actually not call myself an AI SDR, even though we're fundamentally, doing the same things. Um, and so I do think it will continue to exist. I think, in fact, if you surveyed all of our portfolio companies, it's the most commonly asked for AI tool is an AI SDR, because who doesn't want more leads, and who
Right.
doesn't? It's like the most obvious thing to do. But yeah.
All right, so I have an AI AE that prospects, and I come into you with a pitch. This one works, guys. This one really works. Anshu, are you ready for my term sheet? Like, what's going on? Like, this is hot right now. Everybody wants it.
My first reaction is, if everyone wants it, why don't you go sell it to them? Why are you here with me? I'm skeptical of any pitch like that in general. Uh,
Okay.
but on a more serious note, so two different answers, specifically in AISCs and AI AEs, AI SDRs. I think completely the go-to-market function is going to get reimagined by AI. I
Yeah.
think it's a very complex function. I think it's going to take time. I think the first generation of companies, we're throwing spaghetti at the wall, and we're starting to see companies really get nuance around how they automate flows, how they personalize to the individual customer, how they manage, the data flows in a way that you get the level of, human-like experience by the end customer. So I think it's early days out there. I think specifically for us, you know, we're just not in the business of shotgun marriages. So whenever someone comes up with a pitch like that, our immediate reaction is, you know, you're not for us or we're not for you.
And so, how long is a dating period before you turn into a commitment? So it sounds like you're commitment averse, Anshu. Am I reading that right?
Oh, I am very commitment averse. Absolutely. If I'm going to make another 20 commitments in my career, I mean, it better be good. Uh,
Right.
and,
Right.
and, you know, they better be better than Databricks. So that's the bar.
Wow.
So
Wow. Okay.
how long is the dating period? Well, sometimes you fall in love in a few weeks, and sometimes it takes a few months.
What do you say? What's your commitment period? How long does it take for you to fall in love with one of these
I'm not gonna
chats?
lie. I think I also unfortunately have commitment issues, um, but I think that it really depends. I think sometimes you meet people so early on in the process where they don't have an idea and they just quit their company. And so you kind of know nothing about them and you want to date them for like 4 to 5 months to figure out, like, hey,
Yeah.
like, what space are you going to build in? How do they think? And you kind of are gathering observability data on
Mm,
on these people. And it's like, does that observability data match with what I want? And they're observing us too during that period. So
right.
it
Right.
varies. Sometimes you only get 2 weeks.
So how do you make a decision so that, we're in the business of seeing all these AI agent companies. The majority of AI agent companies are taking off all over vertical. They are, they're growing fast. They're racing in surprisingly fast amounts of time. And I think it's, you know, virtue of the market, et cetera. So how will you make a decision in 2 weeks when you look at one of these AI agent companies? So you have a catalog of, ideas that you're ready to go, or you have to, it's a case by case type of scenario.
How do you decide if you're falling in love? I mean, it boils down to, we all have a playbook. We all have a checklist
Yeah.
until, you make contact with reality. And I really do think it is one of falling in love.
Mm,
But how do we, and we all have a type, you know, uh, I like super technical founders. Uh, I'm willing to take a lot of UI UX issues, which other people might not. And so, I have a very broad aperture of acceptability for UI and UX founders. Uh, I think we have a playbook in terms of what kind of companies we think will win. So we definitely sort of look at it in terms of what kind of data flywheel do they have, can they have, do they really understand what it takes to build a deeply technical apps company versus just be a wrapper. Uh,
yeah.
I think we think a lot about what their unique insight is. I mean, take the AISDR space. I mean, there's like a million companies. So, why are they special?
Right.
And then I think last but not the least, even though we don't really invest in companies with revenues, in fact, I always tell people, if you have revenues, don't call me. I'd rather not deal with messy revenues. I want to deal with, big ideas. But even in big
Interesting.
idea companies, on a part point, there's traction. Who are the early customers you're talking to? Who are the early engineers you're recruiting? Who are the advisors? Like if someone's running a company in sales tech and they haven't talked to many, I'm like, why not? If you haven't been able to get to many, I'm not funding
That's
you.
right. It's
Yeah.
right. It's like you haven't talked to Dre. You can't put an album if you haven't talked to Dre. So wait, what? So do you feel like you're missing the whole wave of ChatGPT rappers that are out there and growing decently enough? I mean, there's enough of them out there that are doing a good enough job, and so may argue that rappers are not a bad thing. Jaya, what do you say to that? You've been ditching rappers publicly for a while, so like, are you missing the mark, or is it gonna come back to bite you, or is this, or you gonna sit with this one out and wait for the real companies to come out?
That's a great question. So I think rappers have generally gotten a bad rap, and not to be punny, but like I think right when ChatGPT came out, everyone was like, everything's a rapper, and then you started seeing uh, so I think there's three types of buckets I would like put this into. And like one is like, if you think about the foundation model, what are their core primitives? Like, what are the things that they're naturally good at? And so
Yeah.
they're really good at generating text and they're really good at generating code. And so I think of anything that is like sort of bundling, being a text writer or being, um, you know, generating code and putting a wrap around that. I think those are not going to be that defensible. Now, I think where you do get defensible wrappers, if we want to call them that, is where you're doing a ton of forward deployed eng work, where you're doing a lot of like, okay, I'm selling my AI SDR tool to Databricks per se, and there's one AE team that likes the sales emails written a certain way, and there's another AE team that likes the sales emails written a different way. How am I doing that tuning? How am I working with the customer day to day? And so
Mm.
I think it's a lot about, who's actually working with the customer very closely, who's like going after, domain specific products that are defensible in different verticals, and not kind of building on like the path of the model.
So what do you make of a Scribe or Harvey? I mean, you can argue that those are just like thin wrappers on top of ChatGPT. And I mean, they're crushing, and I think they both just raise some
Yeah,
amount at an evaluation.
it's a good question. I actually think that those are defensible companies, and I know Harvey more. And Ashu, you might disagree with me here, but I do think that in Harvey's case, for example, they actually have like lawyers as like what you would think of your traditional CSM as. And I think that that is the moat. Like they're able to capture all this tribal knowledge of like each certain law firm and like the different processes that they have, and like
Mhm.
customize like Harvey for that specific company. And so in a way they're almost building like a Harvey reasoning model per law firm. And I think that that is like really where the differentiation comes from.
Got it.
So Benny, what is a wrapper is a question of a point in time. I mean, at some point, Salesforce was just a wrapper on an Oracle database.
It
Uh,
was.
and still is arguably in some ways. I think I think the companies that start off by being a thin veneer
Yeah.
on top of a model have gotten eaten away. And the question is, how do you make your wrapper interesting enough? And the data flywheels, the fact that you can add reasoning and use reinforcement learning to do very, very customized workflows, I think is a part of it. Uh, I I think the ability to think about intermediate data abstractions, because very often, you know, without intermediate data abstractions, the models are just oversimplifying when applying retrieval to a morass of data. But if you can find, many people are using AI itself to reimagine how the data is organized, and you get intermediate data abstraction on which you then run the models.
Hmm.
So that's an architectural decision that allows you to do things which an out-of-the-box GPT model can't. Uh, I think very often it's integrations with existing proprietary data sets. It's the ability to take data sets, and proprietary can mean across customers
Yeah.
or for your individual customer, and most likely both. So I do think the winning companies in this category are doing very interesting things, and they are able to demonstrate to us that they have a shot. And look, the best case is a shot. They have a
Right.
shot at staying a couple of years ahead of the model providers. And to
Interesting.
your original question of are we missing things? Look, we're neurotic people. We're high anxiety people. So absolutely, every day when I get up in the morning, I'm like, shit, what did I miss today?
That's a hard way to live, Anshu. And it's not going to
Yeah,
help you get any younger.
you, when you're in tech, there is no easy way to live. You're either driving at 120 miles an hour or not at all.
That's right. So tell me, what do you make of the whole cursor, windsurf, Cloud Code, situation that is playing out in front of us? Is that a defensible moat, or is that something that is just gonna go away? They're in the path of the LLMs, and they're gonna take that over.
I think there's two aspects to this issue. I think first and foremost, just the way the acquisition got structured,
Yeah.
I think is a super negative thing. I think for the ecosystem, I think if I was a 25-year-old engineer working at these companies, I'd be super pissed.
Yep.
And I do think there's going to be a price for founders at large, unfortunately, which is paid by by the community at large for bad behavior by a few. Talking more broadly about the category,
Yep.
I think it's clear that we're just going to add a wrapper on top of GPT for code generation is hard to sustain. Not impossible, again, not impossible, but hard to sustain. And the
Yeah.
reason it's hard to sustain is coding is a category where the underlying models are really invested. It's a question of how much are they willing to sort of invest to win. And so far, the data suggests that every model provider is willing to invest whatever it takes to win in the underlying model infrastructure.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
that said, I think, is a lovable sort of a viable business? Possibly, because it's targeting a user that's not a traditional developer. I mean, you and I are old enough to remember tools like Wix.
Yep.
And if you had looked at Wix at the seed stage, you probably said, like, what is this Mickey Mouse shit? But Mickey Mouse shit had a few $100 million in revenues. I mean, still Mickey Mouse shit, but Mickey Mouse shit that sells.
That's right. That's right. So what do you say, Jai? Where does this go? Like, there is all this nonsense going around our cursor, like, raising prices because they're running out of cash, and they're racing right now because they are, they're eating the margins pretty much. So is that a myth, or you did the modeling in your head and this is reality?
Yeah. I think the situation is like, I think what it makes clear is that, if you end up deciding to like, if you're an application company and you're building on top of one of these model companies, like, and you're suddenly making a lot of money and revenue, like, they might be also launching an application that competes with you. And so I think that's like sort of the thing to worry about. What is the next thing? I think the first thing, it was like Copy AI and some of those other startups, and it became like the Cursor and Windsurfs of the world. And then I think what's going to be next is going to be interesting as well. And I think you kind of alluded to this, but it's a very tough position when the company powering your product and collecting like 100% of your infrastructure spend is simultaneously building a direct competitor. And then you decide to go poach the two PMs that, are building that direct competitor to you. And then, then that company decides to, stop giving you like a pricing discount, and then you mess up your pricing, and then your users get mad at you. So, I think if you don't control the data or the interface and learning loop, like, your roadmap is going to be extremely vulnerable.
This is better than Love Island. I love this shit. Like, it's this is incredible. Like the gossip and the intricacies of like the people
Oh,
itself. It's amazing.
you don't need to watch soap operas anymore. You could just hang out on
I
Twitter now.
know. Dude, I
Yeah.
was just talking to my wife. She's like, "Why can't you Love Island with me?" I was like, "I get to live it. Like, every day there is already some kind of noise in the market about some people like doing some funny things to each other, and like, what verticals are you excited about? So you talked about verticals. What verticals are you excited about? What verticals are you not excited about? So what pitch you take in, what pitch you reject? And I know you're founder friendly, blah blah blah. But let's talk markets.
I still fundamentally have always had a bias towards sort of market size. And so I optimize for
Hmm.
large markets with very deeply entrenched incumbents, because the bigger the incumbents are, the harder they fall when they fall. So for me, we spent a lot of time looking at finance automation, and Jay and I have been doing a ton of work at automating finance. Uh, we think so. That's
Like,
one.
are you talking like accounting, controllership?
I think it's a
What part of
variety.
it?
So within finance automation, I think accountants, number one. I mean, you have to go where the people are.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Every AI apps company is about finding 1 million white collar workers that work in high paid geographies and automating
Yep.
them away. So there's a few million accountants in the US. So I think that's a big opportunity. Now, some of those companies will be truly horizontal. So it's finance teams across Fortune 500. Some of those companies will go really deep into a particular vertical. So it could be automating finance for investment banks. I think you'll see different slices. The second thing
Interesting.
is there's so much focus on code generation by the horizontal platforms that I think there's a massive opportunity for the post, like maintaining, managing, migrating code. We've made several investments in that category. We've made investments in companies that are saying, "Hey, I'll help you debug." If the cost of generating code goes to zero, theoretically, the cost of manage that code goes to infinity, because you have an
Yeah.
infinitely larger amount of code base. Uh, I have a company that's migrating old school code, think SAP Oracle-like code. I funded the company earlier this year. Their first deal, which hasn't been signed yet, so knock on wood. Uh, but the first customer is likely to give them a $20 million plus TCV deal.
What?
When's the last time
First
a
customer.
seed states got a first customer $20 million plus TCV deal?
Damn. Okay, yeah, no, I haven't seen that before. That's how you go from like seed stage to like C stage in like one deal.
Exactly.
Like that's
I,
it. That
I wish my C stage companies were doing $20 million deals on a daily basis. It feels like seed directly at E.
100%.
So we're also seeing, I think, huge opportunities in verticals like healthcare. Like I would have said, run for the hills if you had said healthcare 5 years ago. Lots of niche software, incredibly hard to drive user behavior changes. And try getting a doctor to change anything. Like,
Yep.
nightmare category to sell software or anything else for that matter. Uh,
Yep.
but with AI, when you start automating away work in a hospital, that's money, because those are very, very large, low margin businesses.
Yep.
Large, low margin, labor intensive businesses. So I think healthcare has been interesting for us. I think things we have stayed away from, I wouldn't say good or bad, uh, manufacturing, like
Really? Oh
selling
wow.
software to factory automation, because the factory automation, the integration between the software and hardware is very complex. The last mile is hardware. So you want to do automation software in a factory. Now, eventually, it's going to touch a Scala system, and these Scala systems haven't changed in 30 years. Half of these factories don't have proper Wi-Fi or fiber, and
Yeah.
so the last mile there is hard. But again, maybe that's our bias. Yeah, what do you think? What are you in love with? What are you running for the hills from?
Yeah.
I think it goes like I think a lot of people were excited about horizontal markets, and then vertical markets have become super, super interesting in the past like 3 years. And I I would say, like, there's like the way I think of it is there's like kind of like all these roles where you see like there's 100 startups in the space, like the AI SDR, the AI SRE, there's like hundreds of each of those, AI marketing analysts, 200 of those. And then you go to like some of these niche spaces where you might see like, someone doing like, I'm automating a certain insurance worker at a brokerage, or I'm automating like specialty clinics, the person that does like prior auth there. And I think that sometimes actually the more specific the wedge and like it's seemingly sort of like a small market when you first look at it, but then like there's this high velocity because they've become so specific about the wedge. And so,
Mm.
maybe they did specialty at first and they moved to DME, like direct medical equipment. We have a company called Tenor that's like, you know, started with one smaller vertical and then moved very quickly to others. We have another company called Fulcrum that's, automating work in insurance for insurance brokerages. And so I think that there's actually a lot of smaller exciting vertical or that seem smaller like on the surface when they come pitch to us, and then
Yeah.
they become bigger over time by jumping within that vertical.
But wait, how do you get conviction pre-factor? So over time is post-factor. What is your conviction path? So I come to you with like, I automate, liability insurance renewals for people over 80, right? How do you get conviction that that's going to be a big company?
That's a great question. I think it all comes back down to founder.
All
And
right.
I know that's the cop out answer, but it's just the truth. Usually these people, when they pitch to us, and Ashu made a point about how we don't like revenues. I do like revenues, just for what it's worth. So if you have
Because
revenue,
Anshu is a communist. He doesn't like money, but like finally get to talk to somebody who has,
I like
more
delayed
sense of humor.
gratification. Lots of money, just a little later.
I like money later, just lots of it.
exactly. But I do think it comes really back down to the founder and their, a lot of these founders, sometimes they actually know nothing about the space and they've spent 6 months to a year like learning about it. But it's not like they actually had like a bunch of experience in it. And so it's a lot about that learning curve. And it goes back to the observability data too. Like, how do you see them learn over those 6 months? How fast are they picking up in the space? Like, every single time you meet with them, do they come with a completely new insight or a completely
Mm,
new way of like thinking about the market?
got it. So it's the dating process that informs you their ability to expand that market.
Yep. No arranged marriages.
Nothing. None of that. No. So tell me. So wait. So what have you said no to lately that you were sort of got excited originally and then you eventually turn it down? You don't have to name names. Like give me substance.
I won't name names, but
Oh,
they're
safe space here.
exactly safe space. There's sometimes where you just meet a team and you absolutely fall in love with them, and you know that like the time to get in is like right then and there, and yet all they have is potentially like a research paper. And
Mhm.
but that this team is a very unique mix of something with a lot of like exceptional characteristics. And I think that there was one company where we met them very early on. They had raised like a tiny bit of capital, and you know we knew that the only way to get in was like sort of preempting them for the next round. And I think they were smart. They knew to run a process, and I think we did our best. But I think sometimes it's just there's that dating process. Sometimes it doesn't work in your favor.
Mm.
Yeah, it's such a long list. I mean, I built my career on ad tech. If you go back 17 years, media buying, ad creation, ad optimization, automating sort of manual workflows in the media process. And obviously, all of that is getting reinvented right now. You know, SEO is becoming GEO. Uh,
Yep.
Ad creation tools are getting completely reimagined. So everything up and down the ad stack. And I mean, I've been lucky enough to have made billions of dollars in doing that in the last wave 15 years ago. And so I get every single company that gets out of the space somehow seems to find me. And it's just, so on one hand, I just kind of get excited. Another company to create an ad, like it's just not that interesting. Do I really want to have to talk to customers at WPP? Not really. Do I really want to
Mm.
organize nail polish parties for customers? Not really. All the things we did in the ad tech days.
Right.
On the other hand, I'm worried that I'm walking away from a market I know really well and where I think there's a lot of value to be created. Uh, so that's one example.
But not only that, but you can also create value for your portfolio company. So that's really interesting that you're walking away from it. because you create a lot of value there.
It's about falling in love. When I say walking away, eventually every investment, I am giving away a piece of my heart to the company, and I'm committing to give away a piece of my heart for the next 10, 15 years if it works. I'm committing to getting up every morning and thinking about that company. I'm committing to sort of doing late night dinners, talking about the pains of selling to those customers. And so you have to fall in love for me that way and really
Yeah, yeah.
think about, especially as you get older and there's fewer and fewer things you can do. I can only do another 15, 20 companies. Uh, and I just haven't been that excited about adtech 2.0, despite the fact that, it's been an area that I made a lot of money.
So changing topics a little bit. What are you in complete disagreement with the market right now? Like, what is the market trending that you're calling bullshit on it and you're saying I'm not doing it?
I'll speak for, and Jay and I might come up with very different answers. So I'm very skeptical on both OpenAI and Anthropic. I think both companies are getting valued at crazy, crazy valuations. They have phenomenal growth today, and I think when the dust settles, it's not clear that the winners in that category will be either of the two companies.
Oh, that's hot.
I think that, before any older founder watches this, I do think that, younger founders are back. Like, I think there was a period of time where a lot of people, were not excited about the, two Stanford dropouts or two Harvard dropouts, but actually in the world of AI, like, from a founder perspective, like, AI is new for everyone. Like,
Yeah.
and if anyone can kind of predict what's happening in 6 months, like, I would call that bullshit. Like, no one knows what's happening. And so I think to the extent that someone has a ton of experience, yes, it's definitely helpful in terms of all those things like company building and whatnot. But I do think that you are seeing in this market like a ton of younger founders even outpace like second time, third time founders that have built, unicorn companies. And I think that is just because, it they're everyone has kind of like the same resources, and they can also like really ramp up on AI quickly. And you're also using AI at the same time to help build your company faster. So a lot of knowledge has been, I think, quickly democratized.
Interesting. So you wouldn't have invested in pay because I'm an older founder and I'm steering the ship. I mean, the best I
Manny,
can.
that's why you have both Jay and me in the firm.
Exactly.
We play it both
Yeah,
ways.
that's right. That's right. Disagreement is how you make great decisions. No, I love it. I love it. And I actually no, I say that in jest. I fundamentally believe that the way that you build a company now is, I build outreach in a particular way and the best I knew back then. I hire a lot of people who had good experience in the areas that I needed. But right now, my decision making is completely different. Is that given that everything is new and we have to invent or learn things on the fly as they go, I default for earlier in career, a little bit savvier with the tools that we have in front of us, and smaller. And that feels more productive to me. That feels more cohesive. That feels like we're making faster progress that particular way. So yeah, I'm sort of like just winking, nodding, just agreeing but disagreeing with you. So what lasting thing? So like a lot of our listeners are building AI agent companies. What would be your advice to those people to build successful companies, big companies, and things that are enduring?
I think it comes down to, you have to kind of do what the model providers won't. And it goes back to our cursor windsurf discussion. But like, I think it's really about going deep, embedding in systems that the model providers really won't touch, training on data they won't have access to, that they can't access, building feedback groups that they can't replicate, and like, operating in sort of these messy domain specific environments where the success of the user actually doesn't just depend on the model's like outputs, but also on like the tight integration with all the tools in the real world, the human workflows, and like you know specific feedback loops. And so I think it's really about like, hey, let's think about what are the model capabilities, but also like let's not get like squashed by the model.
I think the thing I would add to that is think big, go fast. I think in the world of SaaS, just to go back in time, there were a million feature companies. I think the world of AI apps and AI agents is about a 500 agents from one company replacing 500 feature companies. So you've got to, it's almost, you know, counter sort of to conventional VC wisdom. You've got to think broad, you've got to think big, and you've got to execute like crazy to see, which agent, because very often one or two agents doesn't solve anything for a customer. They need enough of these agents to really move the meter.
Yeah.
So think big, move fast. And I think to Jaya's point, like, look, a lot of the lessons that you and I learned over the last few decades in software apply, but a lot more don't. So knowing when to break the mold and reinvent and reimagine how you do things, I think is a big part of winning in the AI apps race today.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's what I'm saying too, is that I tend to agree with the combo of somebody who knows the industry partner with somebody who is kind of like AI native, if you would, somebody who has experience wrangling these things into do some work. And the bigger problem is own learning, right? Everything that you know so that you can apply the new, not to new processes, but new period. And, even to the outcome-based pricing conversation, like, it doesn't have to work for everybody, but for some people will. And if you're one of those people, you're gonna crush it in that market. So it's a fascinating time to be in the business. Team, I appreciate you making the time. This was awesome. We got a lot out of it. That was fun. Can't wait to do it again. And thanks again for coming to the pod.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Manny. Thank you for the opportunity.